Gran Turismo 7 has been one of PlayStation's worst launches in recent memory, and not because it's a bad game, it's actually a fantastic racing simulator, but all of that is ruined by the greed and deception surrounding this game, where the microtransactions are so disruptive that it ruins the gameplay loop, the progression systems, which is why if you go to Metacritic right now and check out Gran Turismo 7's listing, you'll find a user score of a measly 1.8. This was at a 2.4 when I recorded my video yesterday, by the way, so rapidly the user score has been diminishing. So much so, in fact, that Gran Turismo 7 managed to make it into the top 100 worst user-rated games on Metacritic of all time, sitting at, I believe, 83 or something. This is page 178 out of 179, and Gran Turismo 7 is near the bottom here. It is top 100. So that's not good. And then matters only get worse when you realize that at this point, Gran Turismo 7's user score on Metacritic has gone so low that it's actually worse than Battlefield 2042 now, as highlighted by the Battlefield 2042 subreddit. Fun fact, Gran Turismo 7 now has a lower user score on Metacritic than Battlefield 2042, and you can see this for yourself on PS5. Battlefield 2042's user score is sitting at 2.6, on Xbox 2.2, on PC 2.1. Meanwhile, as of the taking of this screenshot, GT7 score was sitting at 2.0. Now it's sitting at even lower, 1.8, and we'll see if it dips further. But suffice to say that people are pretty pissed off at Gran Turismo 7, and it having a lower user score than Battlefield 2042 doesn't necessarily make it a worse game than Battlefield 2042. It just makes the disappointment that much greater because you expect BS out of EA, but out of Sony and PlayStation, who've been on a roll, you don't expect them to release something so cynically greedy, so just intended to diminish gameplay in favor of monetization to the point where it straight up ruins a game that had so much potential to just be a genre-leading title. And to give you a recap of where Gran Turismo 7 went wrong, it all starts with the deception of not giving reviewers access to the game's microtransaction system. As many greedy games have done in the past, they updated the game with microtransactions after the reviews came out, so that the reviews would not reflect the version of the game that most players would be playing at launch, the one with the monetization added and the one with the rewards and progression diminished to lure players into the microtransaction store. It wasn't possible for reviewers to tell how much credits would cost when the game was released. Once it did, they found out, and it was all exorbitantly expensive. Aside from the usual tiered packages of premium currency, the prices have gone significantly up since previous entries. So, for example, in GT Sport, this Porsche costs $3 in GT7. Spend at least $40 to get the same car. In GT Sport, cars cost somewhere between $1 and $5 each. In GT7, they go up to $40. Even more, some cars are going to be in the hundreds of dollars. Like straight up, some legendary cars will cost up to 20 million credits. That's roughly $200 for a single car. And then beyond that, you've got the way they price the car so they don't match the tiers here when it comes to microtransactions packaging. So if you want a car that's 1 million credits, you can't just pay $10 for that exact amount. You have to either buy the 750,000 credits and the 250,000 credits package together for a grand total of $15 to reach 1 million credits. Or if you want sort of better bang for your buck, you got to spend $20 for 2 million credits. On top of the deceitful review process and on top of the increased microtransactions prices, they've also lowered the progression by which you can earn cars via gameplay. As stated here by Video Games Chronicles article, the latest patch makes it harder to earn cars. Reviewers did not have access to this patch. They didn't play the version of the game where the majority of the races had their rewards cut by a third, by half, more even, with only 2 races whose prices haven't increased because their initial rewards were so meager. But other than these 2, the rest of the races have had their credits rewards diminished significantly. Beyond that, the ability to sell cars for credits, which you could do in previous games, is conveniently missing in Gran Turismo 7. On top of that, they've got various shops where they rotate rare items to create that FOMO effect. Others mentioned a roulette system where the game will occasionally award you a random reward, but the odds there are completely rigged. The internet already did the math and compared GT7 to other games, and this is just one example of the most expensive vehicles in the game, how much it would take to earn said vehicles, and GT7 came in dead last because this version of GT5 represents one where you don't get those daily login bonus boosts and quicker ways of earning credits through seasonal events when the game was active. GT7 is the worst case of how much grind you need to earn expensive cars. An issue that's further amplified by the fact that you also have to upgrade your cars, and to do so you also have to spend credits, and it's worse than ever here in GT7 in terms of the pricing and how much credits you have to spend for these upgrades. Then there's the DRM aspect of the game that has drawn a whole lot of controversy. Close to the game's launch, the game underwent server maintenance that turned into a complete outage because people couldn't even access most of the single-player features of the game, the single-player modes, which shouldn't require internet connection, but they do in this game for some reason, and that culminated in players being unable to access the game's content for roughly 30 hours, which is just ridiculous. On top of the microtransactions, the diminished rewards, the deceptions surrounding the reviews, this was just kind of a cherry on top, just adding insult to injury. And the developers' response didn't help matters. They didn't really address the DRM aspect, the fact that single player modes are locked behind online connection. They just said they had an issue with a patch that caused the outage, and so they fixed that, but they didn't really address the DRM aspect. And then when it comes to the microtransactions, they said that it was important to them that this reflects the car culture fantasy and that pricing therefore reflects real life, except therein lies the irony of Gran Turismo 7 wanting to be a fantasy, and what a fantasy is removing the bad aspects and leaving the good. The whole point of a video game, racing game, is so that we're able to race with cars that we are just not going to be able to ever afford in real life, that most people in the world cannot afford or drive in real life. That's why those video games fill that void. The whole point is for us to be able to do things we wouldn't be able to do in real life with none of the consequences, be it you can crash these cars however much you want, or you don't have to spend a ridiculous amount of money on these cars to feel what they drive like in a digital environment and whatnot. It's about leaving in the good, taking out the bad, none of the consequences, all of the fun. But GT7, by trying to be more like real life, it's just turning the fantasy into anything but. It's taking the worst aspects of the fantasy, the part where you can't afford the cars, and applying that into the game. And you want to talk about simulating real life, and how come you cannot sell cars in GT7 like you can in real life? Or hell, how come you can't just go on a solo drive in GT7 without an online connection like you can in real life? They're only cherry picking the aspects of real life that are more monetization based and applying that into the game instead of actually taking the good aspects of real life car culture and concentrating that into GT7. And so the culmination of all of this is that Sony and PlayStation has gotten some of the worst press for a first-party AAA game in a long time, with articles reading like this: Gran Turismo 7 is falling apart and was all totally avoidable. Video Games Chronicle conveyed how Gran Turismo 7 now has Sony's lowest user score ever on Metacritic, 2.5 as of the writing of this article, 1.8 as of the recording of this video, even worse than it was then. On Twitter, people are responding negatively to Gran Turismo's official Twitter page, but people are taking the fight to Gran Turismo 7 in more ways than one. They're going beyond just expressing their umbrage on forums and social media. They're taking active action by employing an exploit that allows them to very easily earn credits without having to touch the controller at all. As reported here by Video Games Chronicle, Gran Turismo 7 players fight unpopular nerf by grinding currency without playing the game. Players begin using scripts to complete races following negatively received payout nerf. And the way this works is that recall that PlayStation has a feature called Remote Play that allows you to stream your PlayStation gameplay on your PC and use PC peripherals or a controller connected to your PC and sort of play PlayStation games that way on your PC monitor, on your PC device. And through that, you can create a script on your computer that controls the remote play session of GT7. And that way, somebody was able to create a script that allows them to earn 15 million credits per day without having to really touch the controller. The game goes on auto mode, and that's around $120 worth of microtransactions per day, according to Video Games Chronicle. If there is ever a time when an exploit or cheat or whatever you want to call it was justified, it'd be right here with GT7. First posted to the PSN Profiles forum by user Septomore, the script, which is currently only compatible with Windows machines running the PlayStation Remote Play app, repeatedly enters inputs into the game in order for it to essentially run laps of the same track over and over, gaining credits each time. And clicking on the link provided by Video Games Chronicle, you can see the PSN Profiles forum post yourself, where Septomore explains exactly how to set all of this up, and you can try this out yourself if you want. I'll leave a link in the description below. Like, straight up, given how cynically greedy GT7 is, I don't mind promoting this exploit. If Gran Turismo 7 wants to shatter people's car culture fantasy, then hey, people, I guess, will retort by shattering the game itself so they can, in their own terms, fulfill the car culture fantasy that this game should have been. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Sony and PlayStation have heard about this, if they have plans to implement some kind of solution so people cannot do this. But for now, this flies, and this is something you can do. And as long as Sony and PlayStation and Polyphony continue to be greedy about GT7, I say, hell, why not exploit this when they are the ones trying to exploit us first, when they started this fight, this discourse, when they started this conflict. Now, the introduction of this exploit does not mean that social media and forum activity and talk about GT7 has gone quiet. You've got people saying things like, decided to ramble about GT7's latest problematic woes, which quite simply have tarnished all of the game's good reputation. I absolutely adore this game, but the DRM, currency earns, car prices, microtransactions, etc. are a joke and need to be sorted out. Next up, we have John Linman from Digital Foundry, who chimed in when somebody said, feels like people finally understand the DRM criticisms. GT7 down for hours today with 99% of the game completely unavailable. This online requirement has to end and not become the norm for single player content. The DRM aspect of the game is really pissing people off, and it's a trend that we absolutely do not want normalized. John Linman from Digital Foundry agrees. Perhaps folks can understand why I've been against online DRM in games and hardware. It feels as if I've been running around like Roddy Piper in They Live, while everyone else is like, but I have internet. This problem goes way beyond GT7. Here's another post that gained a decent amount of traction. The in-game currency of GT7, rather than encourage me to pay for microtransactions, has encouraged me to not play the game at all. Congratulations, Gran Turismo, a textbook lesson in how to throw away 25 years of goodwill with one update. That's the thing about trust. It takes forever to build up, but it takes one fatal mistake to bring the whole house of cards crumbling down, and that's exactly what it feels like it's happening with Gran Turismo, unless they find a way to salvage this by taking major steps backwards on how they've implemented the monetization of this game. Here's prominent game modder Lance McDonald chiming in. Gran Turismo 7 launches to fantastic reviews despite the always online DRM. Then after the reviews drop, they launch a mandatory update, which increases the reliance on microtransactions. The version of the game that was reviewed is already totally lost to time. amazing. That's the scary thing. On launch day, the more ideal version of GT7 ceased to exist, and with just a flip of a switch, just like that, Sony managed to turn Gran Turismo 7 into an almost entirely different type of game, one that's focused more on monetization and less on having fun through gameplay and rewarding loops. And they intentionally played reviewers so that the Metascore would be bright and shiny, and then on launch day, boom, drop the bomb that is not reflective of that score or of reviewers' experiences with the game. Everybody else won't get to play what reviewers got to play. People don't realize that always online means always updated. Nothing stops the developers from just jamming in a bunch of loot boxes, microtransactions, or NFTs, and once they do, you either accept the update or you can't play the game you originally bought ever again. And that's not just for the multiplayer component, it's also for the single player aspect, because with GT7, even the single player modes are locked behind an internet connection, behind an always updated environment. The fear of what if the servers go down is nowhere near as valid as what if the developers decide to fuck customers over completely and destroy the game from the top down, which is exactly what they did with GT7 on day one. Who cares if it's always online? I'll always have internet. No shit, that's not the problem. They know they can force whatever changes they want on you because they'll always have access to you they can rely on. They want more control, more access. They want to make sure that they can control as much of your experience as possible as it's happening live, in the moment, in the instant. And with GT7, that launch instant was the instant the game became shit. Because a game is more than just about its mechanics. GT7 mechanically is wonderful, fantastic, an awesome racing simulator, but if what you do with those mechanics aren't fun, then it's still not a good game, and that's what GT7 is at right now. That's the status it's currently in. It doesn't end there. We got more people chiming in. We got MVG here, who's a prominent game developer at Night Dive Studios. Online DRM has ruined Gran Turismo 7, kept it pretty simple. And you can see the message here yourself. A connection to the server cannot be established. This is even when trying to access, again, single player modes that have no excuse being locked behind an online connection. Christina Tasty's tweet here gained a bit of traction. I'm surprised that not many people are covering the absolute abysmal launch of Gran Turismo 7. I'm surprised that reviewers aren't going out there and changing their scores because they got duped. Always online, microtransactions, payouts have been nerfed for literally every race except for 2 that was worth next to nothing originally. Patch literally broke missions and tests. There's a few racing YouTubers that have tackled it, but I haven't seen much from the usual gaming things I go to. I did address this in my previous video after these tweets came out. I was a little late to the draw, but still I'm bringing attention to it now. But yeah, she says that I may have missed it, but this launch is so astronomically bad. Like, the amount of disappointment from the GT community cannot be overstated. It's why the user score even managed to dip below Battlefield 2042, not an easy task. Here we have Twitter user Thunder highlighting the absolute greed of this game with how certain cars are priced 18 million, 18.5 million, up to 20 million. We're roughly looking at $180 to $200 worth of microtransactions that you'd have to spend money on to be able to afford these cars or grind for such an insufferable amount of time that it's ultimately not worth it. The No-Beds is a new salad that had an opinion to share. Gran Turismo 7's problematic always online and currency earn issues have ruined an excellent game's reputation, and Polyphony Digital urgently needs to address them. Do you see that there's a repeating pattern here? Polyphony, reputation, ruined, reverse this, now, stop it. Get some help. Here's a content creator going by the name Pio who said, never be afraid to speak your mind. What Sony is doing with GT7 is beyond scummy. Let them know you don't want online only DRM GT game. You don't want microtransactions in a full price game that's worse than free to play games. They showed no respect. Let them know how you feel. And this is during a time when the user score was at a 1.9. Again, it's dropped even more to a 1.8. But yeah, keep in mind, this is a full price game. This isn't a free to play title. It is straight up just a full-fledged AAA premium release, and there's no excuse for the microtransactions to be at the level that they are in this game. Tom Warren from The Verge, Gran Turismo 7 issues highlight an emerging problem with modern games. If you buy a disc version, it means nothing for lots of games. You have to be connected. Tom Warren also brings up a tweet that aged very poorly from back in June 10th, 2013, when they were slamming on Xbox, back when Xbox One was announced disastrously. PS4 disc-based games don't need to be connected online to play. Thunderous, deafening applause. Wow. How the years have changed you, PlayStation. And so Tom Warren continues with, many single-player Xbox games do this. Sony mocked Microsoft, but they're both doing it now. If you thought the Twitter activity was bad, well, you can expect much more passionate discussions in the subreddit, where people have compiled mega threads featuring all kinds of complaints about the game. You've got Reddit posts like this highlighting how the competition is starting to make fun of the game. This is a real tweet that I can show you right here from Grid Legends. Grid Legends is a video game with cars in that you can play right now. They posted this during the time when the Gran Turismo 7 blackout happened. It was very obvious what they were referencing. And I mean, it's not like the tweet was lying. Here we have somebody making fun of what patch 1.09 will bring. It'll introduce fuel costs with realistic inflation rates linked to crude oil prices, since it's all about fulfilling that real life car culture fantasy, right? Though, again, a good fantasy is when you leave out the bad parts and only leave in the good parts, like the fantasy of driving the cars and being able to afford them reasonably enough, instead of all this gouging that happens in the real world. That's the one part we don't want reflected in our video games. And then here we have a Reddit post, imagine a world that the tires cost more than the race winning price. That's a real world price for you, Kaz. That's the thing. Again, he's cherry picking the aspects of real life racing culture that he wants in his games, the aspects that are greedy, the aspects that they can monetize, instead of the aspects that are ideal. Tire prices being what they are in this game, and the fact that you cannot afford tires after like winning a race, that's freaking ridiculous and obviously not reflective of real life. We got memes like this, and while I was making this, the 917K went up for 18 million, referring to the McLaren F194, which is priced at 18,500,000 credits, which would take 21 hours of optimal grinding time, 93 hours of normal gameplay time. So 21 hours is just the best case scenario for the average gamer. 93 hours to earn this many credits, just completely untenable, especially given how many expensive cars there are in GT7 and how many of those many people would love to drive to fulfill their car fantasy. This person gets it. A reminder, Gran Turismo, Kaz Yamauchi, we play GT7 to be able to experience these absolutely unattainable and beautiful cars. We have to. We aren't billionaires. Why are you making the economic side of vintage racing part of the simulation? It's the opposite of car culture. Why are you making this game as inaccessible as cars are in real life? Like, okay, well, not as much as in real life. In real life, we're talking about millions and billions of dollars, but even in the micro form of car racing culture that GT7 has created, with cars costing hundreds of dollars, cars that aren't actually real and only exist in a digital virtual environment, it is simulating enough of the real world aspect that it does feel egregious, like they're nickel and diming, like they're exploiting, like they're disrespecting the player base and just basic human intelligence. The choice is clear here, Sony and PlayStation. You've got a PR shitstorm in your hands right now. You've disappointed a number of gamers who are now expressing their doubts in trusting your future endeavors, especially with your acquisition of Bungie and you announcing you want to do like 10 live services in the next however many years and whatnot. Now people are starting to get worried about those live service ventures, that you're going to delve into the really greedy side of things. If this is how far you're going to go with Gran Turismo, taking such a huge leap forward and how much greedier Gran Turismo's gone with its microtransactions, it's hard to imagine other live services down the line. Show us that you're actually listening and show us that you'll never pull something like this again. Because if you don't change this, if you don't reverse this, people will continue to speak out, continue to protest. And even if this is forgotten, in the short term, in the long term, when you announce the next Gran Turismo game, people will remember this, and that will follow you for the long term. Think long term. Don't tarnish the legendary history that Gran Turismo has built up, and do the right thing. And if Sony and PlayStation and Polyphony decide to remain stubborn about all of this, well, you've got this solution right here where you don't have to put much effort into the game. You don't have to touch a controller. You leave this running. You get the credits that you want, and then you can actually start to fulfill the car culture fantasy that GT7 was supposed to without, let's call it, additional assistance. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the state of Gran Turismo 7, the backlash, the low user score on Metacritic, and the protest that's happening through this exploit, if you want to call it that. Though for me, it's more of a pushback and a rebalancing of the game on the user side, because I mean, this is eye for an eye. This is fighting fire with fire, fighting exploitation with exploitation. That's my take. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.